Hi there everyone, this is Geoffrey Starks. I'm the Director of Development at the Cayuga Museum. It is a hot but beautiful day here at the Cayuga Museum. I am going to talk to you today about the Case Research Laboratory, which is one of the 3 buildings on the campus for the Cayuga Museum. So right behind me you will see the Case Research Laboratory. If you've ever walked on our campus over on Genesee Street, you have probably passed the building. You might have thought it was a shed if you weren't familiar with it before. I just want to tell you that it is not just a shed. It did used to be a greenhouse in the 19th century, but the last owner of the house, Theodore Case, who was a major inventor who lived here in Auburn, New York, decided to turn it into a working laboratory. Now, Theodore Case was a very wealthy man who started really exploring the sciences. He was so wealthy. Think like, there's some younger audience members here. Think of like Tony Stark, somebody who's already very wealthy but brilliant and able to really invent the modern world. So what this laboratory was known for was developing a number of major inventions that we take, frankly, for granted today. And the biggest one that came out of here was they invented sound film. Now, for those who don't know, in the early 20th century, film did not have sound on it. You basically would have an entire movie where the audio would be, you'd hear nothing, you'd just hear music playing. Maybe you'd even have a piano in the theater itself playing the music. But for the dialogue, for people speaking, you'd have panels put up. Now, what Theodore Case decided to figure out was how to make sound happen. Now, think of your favorite movie nowadays. I'm sure your favorite movie, you can hear every part of it. That's what Theodore Case came up with. So I'm going to walk you through the laboratory and show you how he did it. So one thing I'd like to play around with is what it would be like to have a silent film. Now, of course, it would be in black and white. And then when you didn't have the sound, now imagine that being your film experience nowadays. You think you'd be interested in it? So this is the Case Research Laboratory. This was a working laboratory through most of the early 20th century. So what you'll notice through here is the laboratory is actually set up in much the same way that it would have looked when there were people working here. Now, it was operating from the early 1900s till 1941 in World War II, and actually there was a little bit of time where the museum was in the mansion on the property and there was a laboratory working here. Now, let's get started on talking a little bit about what Case did himself. Just so everyone can see, I'm going to move away from focusing so much on my own face. So, Theodore Case decided to develop film in through a number of different inventions. So what you'll see here are these spotlights that we've arrayed in the laboratory to look at one another. Now, this wasn't what really made the Case Research Laboratory come out into the public. So what happened is these spotlights are infrared. Now, for those who don't know, infrared is invisible light. This was a major innovation because this is before phones have really taken place, before you have radio. So this was used in World War I as a way of talking between ships. Now, if you think about it, back then, ships, their main communication would have been to send up flares or flags, which is highly visible, which in World War I, there were so many submarines going around that the Germans were using. So an invisible system of communication was perfect for being able to sneak through. Now, this is something that Case really used as a way to get out into the modern world. This system did not end up being used after World War I because radio and sonar was developed right afterwards. But fortunately, after Case had developed this system, this is when he started developing a way of putting sound on film. So let's talk a little bit about what sound film actually means. Now, before this system was created, there was an idea of sound film, but nobody really wanted to do anything with it. Essentially, you'd take a record and play it at the same time as a film was going on. That's a system that Thomas Edison came up with. Nobody really liked it because there was often a lot of lag time, so anybody who's familiar with a YouTube video, and when the audio and visuals do not sync up, it's the most annoying thing in the world. So that's basically what everybody's experience with sound film was at the time, so you can understand why everybody preferred silent movies. Also, silent movies had much more of a backing among the wealthy and connected people of the day. So nobody really wanted to do anything with sound film. It was something that you might see in, for instance, the State Fair. Now, I'm going to show you an old film reel. This might be a throwback for a couple of folks. So, if you look on the sides, it might be a little bit hard to see on the camera, but look on the left of the film strip, you will see little bars. That's sound put directly onto the film, and this is the system that Theodore Case came up with. Now, what was being done at the time is that Theodore Case was working with a man named Lee DeForest. Lee DeForest was a radio personality. We have some photos of him right here. Lee DeForest had an idea that the best way to have sound and film coincide with one another was to have them on the film itself. Now, Theodore Case had been developing a system itself that was so much more efficient, a way to make it more abundant and more available for people. Now, the key to it was this bulb, the AEO light bulb. Now, what the key with this bulb is that it would flash in a certain way on an old camera, which, look at this awesome thing. If anybody decides to come take this tour in person when we are open again, you get to come look at some of the cool stuff here. Now, this camera used these bulbs, and it would flash in a certain way where sound was coming through a microphone. It would come through a system into the camera, and the sound itself would be converted into light energy. Now, you saw those little bars on the side of the film strip. Now, that's sound put directly onto film, and this, just imagine that for a minute. Imagine being a scientist at the time. You're inventing these systems. Can you imagine realizing that sound can be turned into light energy? Can you imagine any kind of those innovations? That's what happened here. Auburn was a hub of innovation in this country. And so many of these major works were a huge part of what eventually became the United States, and frankly, the world. We hear sound film every day. Now, let's get a little bit more back into the story of this. Now, in order to get sound film promoted in front of everybody, they had to take this system and really push it in front of a lot of folks. Now, of course, the minute that people were able to hear sound, they were fascinated by it, but it really took some active promotion. Now, what they would do is Theodore Case partnered with William Fox, who with Case created the Fox Case Corporation. Now, that eventually became 20th Century Fox, which is now part of Disney. This major company was partly created by Theodore Case. So what Fox and Case did is they created the company Movietone. They would take these big trucks. Now you can see this great image that we have here. And they would take these trucks all around the world and promote news stories of the day. Now, this is what people started experiencing with sound film. You would have a silent movie, but before the movie, you would have newsreels beforehand. So this is how people were starting to hear sound in their film. you'd be able to hear the sound beforehand with some news of the day, and then you'd have your silent feature. And this is how people started getting a little more used to it as a system. So some examples of major news stories of the day were the Charles Lindbergh's crossing of the Atlantic. Now, they filmed the crossing itself, and then nobody who was in the crowd over in France knew that it was being filmed in sound. So when they heard themselves talking, when they had it played back to them, everybody was amazed by it. Just imagine suddenly being able to hear yourself when you'd never heard another person's voice on film before. Now, this really got people starting to think about finally being able to hear movies. Now, a lot of people, especially people who are familiar with Singing in the Rain, might think that the first sound film was the jazz singer. Now, that's not technically true because it used the old system of playing a record at the same time, but also it's not a full sound film. It's only a part of it. The real true for sound film is this movie called Sunrise, which was created by the Fox Case Corporation. So we're really a part of bringing sound film, the Hollywood that you know nowadays, to the world. So now I'll just give y'all a little bit of a look at the laboratory itself. You'll get the full story when you come and visit, but really just think about what it must have been like in the 20th century, really developing this. Now, there's a lot of really interesting stories that come out of this. For instance, many of the workers who worked in the laboratory were women. Developing various parts of the sciences. People were developing the bulbs that were the key of this system by hand, blowing glass. Now you'll see, for instance, these various microscopes. Those would be a big part of editing the film itself. And there's so many things in here that really we don't entirely understand anymore because science has moved so much further forward. And that's a big part of the story with the Case Research Laboratory. It's not just the big cities that are part of the innovation in this country. Auburn was a huge part of that as well. And really, that's the story of the American inventor. We're really good at inventing things in our backyard, and I'm sure many of you have even developed some different, really interesting things in your own garages, played around with some things. Now, maybe you weren't inventing something from scratch, but that's what we're all about. We're all about creating something new from something that's been discovered or something brand new for the world. So the basic story that we're getting out of this laboratory is that a creator can come from anywhere. You can go in your backyard, in your garage in this country, and you can go and invent the new world ahead of you. And I think that's really something special to remember, especially nowadays that we're all inside. Now, I would love to give all of you this tour again in the future, so I really hope that folks will come back and we can talk a little bit more about the rest of this story. But thank you so much for listening.